Well, the German government continues its crackdown on anti war voices, whether it be journalists or now political satirists, receiving letters that they're under investigation from the German government if they speak out against the war in Ukraine. Even political satirists who are mocking the entire process. Dan Cohen is following this story and sat down with one particular political satirist who now received a pretty troubling letter. Dan, what's the story?
Well, I spoke with CJ Hopkins, who is an American citizen living in Berlin, Germany, and over since 2020, the rollout of the COVID regime, he has been one of the most incisive and lucid critics of the entire regime. And he runs an outlet called the Consent Factory, where he has published numerous essays criticizing government actions that were pushed through the pretext of a pandemic. So I spoke with CJ about a letter he received from the Berlin state prosecutor threatening prosecution for tweeting his the cover of his book, which is called the New Normal Reich. So take a listen to this interview. You are under criminal investigation by the Berlin state prosecutor for tweeting out the image of the cover of your book. Your book, The Rise of the New Normal Reich, obviously a provocative title. Can you just explain what the hell is going on here?
Yeah, I can I can explain what's going on. The cover of the book, which a lot of people are familiar with, and you can find online in about 2 seconds. It's playing off of the very famous book by William Shirer, the Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. And it's designed in the same way, with a black background and red writing, the rise of the new normal Reich. And instead of the swastika that appears on the Shirer book, there is one of the medical-looking COVID masks stretched across the front. And then faintly behind the COVID mask is the swastika that was on the William Shirer book. Obviously playing off of that. It was done by an artist who does all my book covers, wonderful artist Anthony Freda. In New York. And anyway, the book was published, I think in the spring, it might have been May of 2022. And I promoted it, of course, online and tweeted the cover, I don't know how many times. And also tweeted, just the mask swastika image on a few tweets. I don't know exactly which tweets the Berlin state prosecutor is referring to. I went looking for them. I think they've been censored in Germany, so I can't quite find them. But anyway, I got the letter yesterday from the state prosecutor, and it's a preliminary investigation. And there are criminal charges, which are basically displaying a swastika in Germany. Which is against the law in most cases if you're a Nazi, or you're promoting Nazis. There's a misunderstanding that a lot of people have. People think that swastikas are just, the display of swastikas are outright banned in Germany. And it's not quite true. Of course, there is an exception in the law for works of art and education, and for addressing constitutional, unconstitutional activities, and things like this, and then it's permitted to display them. And obviously, that's what I've done. My book is not a glorification of fascism or totalitarianism. It's exactly the opposite of that. And anyone who has read any of my essays during 2020 and 2021 and since then, frankly, is aware of that. It's quite obvious. Because it's so absurd, because the charge is so absurd, I can only assume that it is, intimidation or retribution. I've been pretty tough on the German authorities, and as well as the American authorities and the British authorities and the Australian authorities and the Canadian authorities. But my opposition to the rollout of the new normal, to all of the COVID measures, has been pretty tough. It's the only way that I can interpret what's happening.
Yeah, so before we kind of get into the legal aspects and the absurdity of this criminal investigation, can you just explain what you mean by the new normal Reich, and the kind of parallels you're drawing through your satire between the COVID regime, everything that was rolled out through the pretext of COVID, and 1940s style fascism?
Yeah, it's basically from the beginning, and the comparison that I've been trying to make. It wasn't right exactly from the beginning, but in 2020, I think in late 2020, I started writing. That this looks like a new form of totalitarianism to me. It looks like it's not the totalitarianism of the 20th century. It's not Nazism. It's not Stalinism. It's not Maoism. It feels like the rollout of a different form of totalitarianism, for lack of a better word. Global capitalist totalitarianism. A lot of people don't like it when I say that, so they can call it globalist capitalism or globalist totalitarianism, or call it whatever you want. But it feels like a new form of totalitarianism. I watched constitutions and constitutional rights be summarily suspended. Of course, we were all put under house arrest. Protests were banned. There was a massive censorship campaign censoring dissent. Those of us who did dissent were demonized. Were just systematically demonized in the press, and on and on and on. That's the book is a collection of my essays for those 2 years, and I covered it month by month and documented all of these features, which are classic hallmarks of totalitarianism. I think it's tough for us to recognize it because we're usually looking back at the past and we're expecting, jackboots and goose stepping and of course, new forms of totalitarianism are not going to look like the old forms, but all of the hallmark features were there. And so that's what I was trying to document. I'm a satirist, so I was trying to be funny about it at first, and then I got a bit more serious as it got scarier and scarier. It ended up we were literally segregated in Germany. It was extremely harsh. The unvaccinated, we were not allowed to go to restaurants, to go into public buildings. Basically, the only place that we could go was to a grocery store to buy food. We weren't allowed on public transport. We were completely barred and segregated from society and systematically demonized by the government and by the media on a daily basis. So that's basically where I was coming from with my critique.
So CJ, I know you just met with your lawyer, and maybe you don't want to speak about possible outcomes, but what is your lawyer saying, or what do you know about the viability of this investigation?
Well, according to the basic law, the Grundgesetz here in Germany, they're charging me with displaying my book cover, basically, as if I were trying to further the aims of the Nazis or a Nazi organization or something, as if I were pro-Nazi, which is of course ridiculous. If I was found guilty of that, the law states that I could be imprisoned for no more than 3 years or made to pay a fine. So I have no idea, and I cannot speak about possible outcomes in the case, but that's what the law says.
So, Clayton, it's still early, unclear where this prosecution is going to go, but there are so many ironies of the German government prosecuting C.J. Hopkins for allegedly promoting Nazism. First of all, the German government has sent Leopard tanks most recently, which are now being destroyed in Ukraine, to a Nazi-infested military, let alone its own Nazi problem inside Germany's own military ranks. Since following World War II, the very fact that the West German government and much of NATO was reconstructed with former Nazi officials who were just kind of whitewashed and put into power again. And so Germany, as it's entered a recession and is on the decline, is now punishing dissent, cracking down, and criminalizing satire, as if CJ, who is obviously making fun of fascism and Nazism and drawing parallels to the current reality, the current regime, not only in Germany, but throughout the West in general, as if he's an actual Nazi. So it's a similar phenomenon that we see with Roger Waters, who has been the subject of a smear campaign accusing him of promoting fascism for performing for donning clothing that makes fun, that also satirizes Nazism and fascism, and he's being smeared and called a fascist by the very same governments who again are supporting fascism in Ukraine. Even Lula da Silva, the Brazilian president, has now his justice minister has threatened to arrest Roger Waters if he does that during his performance. So there's so many ironies to this prosecution, but we're just going to have to see where it goes.
Yeah, I saw Roger Waters on tour just a few weeks ago. I saw him in Portugal, and yes, he puts on sort of faux Nazi outfits, but he's been doing that for decades. It's a part of Pink Floyd's history to talk about these fascist regimes, and he's playing a character, and it is not satire, but he's explaining, he's showing what these leaders do to people. He's vehemently anti-war, anti-fascist, anti-Nazi, and so the fact that they just don't get it was unbelievable. But even beyond that, it's crazy because a number of sources have told me, and they haven't gone public with this yet, but outspoken journalists who are not German citizens but who live in Germany have received similar letters, basically, threatening to have them either prosecuted and or kicked out of the country for their coverage of the Ukraine war and being an outspoken anti-war voice. Like, this is what's happening in Germany. And we've seen, of course, stories and reports of actual German journalists who've been in Ukraine covering the war and who've also received similar letters. Really, really troubling times in Germany, no?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these are really the hallmarks of fascism, I think, of cracking down on dissent, where you can't tolerate free speech, create ideas being shared that go against the edicts of the regime. And again, Germany is free falling. The German economy is in recession. It's just going down, where the Western sort of liberal democracy that has been the model is being discredited in Germany. Maybe nowhere more than Germany, and all at the behest of Brussels and Washington. So it's not like Germany is actually benefiting from this. Maybe a few at the top, but all of this, to use Germany as a battering ram against Russia. But remember, it's the authorities don't want us to think that it's the system or the leadership that's the problem, but it's a guy who's writing essays and poking fun at the regime. That's the guy who has to be punished.
Right, or the Pink Floyd musician is the one that needs to be punished. Unbelievable. Dan Cohen, thank you for this report. Thank you for this interview.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.